Hello, everyone. It's me, Lucian. Hello, hello. Hope you're doing well. Welcome in, yeah. Happy Saturday, or Catterday, as I like to call it. So, as you can see by what's on the screen and the title, we're going to be reading a book together. Now, I know that's pretty different than what I usually do here, but here lately I've been feeling really burnt out on games, and I think it may have been noticeable in streams as well. But yeah, so I decided to take a break from gaming for a little bit, and I thought, well, I still want to stream with you guys. What else could I do? And then it hit me. Well, we could read a book. So we're gonna read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. No idea how far we're gonna go into it, because this is actually the ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's all the novels in one book. But we're gonna read for a while, and depending on what time it is, and you know how I feel, we might stop, we might not. I don't know. I will do my best to keep an eye on chat and respond to you guys, but I will be reading the book and all that. I do apologize for any mispronounced words or stuff like that, as I'm not the best at speaking. Sometimes my brain works faster than my mouth. But yeah, now my model also might go wonky because I am currently looking down at the book, not at the screen. So I apologize if it goes like dead or anything like that. If so, I guess send me a message or you need to make it sound redeem or something. Another thing though that's good before we start is all this time, so I'm not going to be gaming constantly, and I might cut back on the streams just a tad. This gives me time to set up redeems because I forgot there are items you can use for YouTube Studio, henceforth the chair. The little book is a PNG I found online. But there's a head pat redeem I can probably set up and other stuff, so I will have to look into that and other things. But yeah, I just want to explain it all and talk to you a little bit before I start. But without further ado, I'm going to crack open the book and we are going to start. Yeah. Alrighty, here, let me crack open the book. You can probably hear it, the pages flipping. No, no. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 98 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most people living on it were unhappy for pretty much of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper. Which is odd because on the whole, it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. It is Storytime with Lucy. Hello, Morgan. I did not realize my eyes just on my model closed. I don't know why. Excuse me? Oh, it's because I was looking down. Huh, well, good to know. Peace, welcome in. Okay, and so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable, even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should have ever left the oceans. And then, one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Mansworth suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time. And she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right, it would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she could get to a phone to tell anyone about it, a terrible, stupid catastrophe occurred and the idea was lost forever. This is not her story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. It's also the story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, not an Earth book, never published on Earth, and until the terrible catastrophe occurred, never seen or even heard of by any Earthman. Nevertheless, a wholly remarkable book. In fact, it was probably the most remarkable book ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor, of which no Earthman had ever heard either. Not only is it a wholly remarkable book, it is also a highly successful one. more popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 53 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan Kulfid's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters. Well, God went wrong, some more of God's greatest mistakes, and who was this God person anyway? In many of the more relaxed civilizations on the outer eastern rim of the galaxy, the Hitchhiker's Guide has already supplanted the great Encyclopedia Galactica as the stand repository of all knowledge and wisdom, for though it has many omissions and contains much that is apocryphal, or at least wildly inaccurate, it scores over the older, more pedestrian work in two important respects. First, it is slightly cheaper, and second, it has the words "Don't Panic" inscribed in large, friendly letters on the cover. But the story of this terrible, stupid Thursday, the story of its extraordinary consequences, and the story of how these consequences are inextricably intertwined with this remarkable book begins very simply. It begins with a house. I do apologize with my model looking like this. I can't fix it. Thank you so much for the follow, Lively Bee. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't notice that until now. I need to set up some kind of redeem and ways to figure that out. But that might be done when I get back to a 3D model, because I know Vinian has that. Let me go ahead and take a sip. Big sip. Chapter 1. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked out over a broad spread of West Country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squattish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. The only person for whom the house was in any way special was Arthur Dent. I'm glad you could catch it, Lively Bee. Thank you. And that was only because I happened to be the one he lived in. He had lived in it for about 3 years, ever since he had moved out of London because it made him nervous and irritable. He was about 30 as well, tall, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was, to most of his friends, worked in advertising. On Wednesday night, it had rained very heavily. The lane was wet and muddy, but the Thursday morning sun was bright and clear as it shone on Arthur Dent's house for what was to be the last time. It hadn't properly registered yet with Arthur that the council wanted to knock it down and build a bypass instead. At 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, Arthur didn't feel very good. He woke up blearily, got up, wandered blearily around his room, opened a window, saw a bulldozer, found his slippers, and stopped off to the bathroom to wash. Toothpaste on the brush, so scrub. Shaving mirror pointing at the ceiling, he adjusted it. For a moment it reflected a second bulldozer to the bathroom window. Properly adjusted, it reflected Arthur Dent's bristles. He shaved them off, washed, dried, and stomped off to the kitchen to find something pleasant to put in his mouth. Kettle, plug, fridge, milk, coffee, yawn. The word bulldozer roared through his mind for a moment in search of something to connect with. Bulldozer outside the kitchen window was quite a big one. He stared at it. Yellow, he thought, and stomped off back to his bedroom to get dressed. Passing the bathroom, he stopped to drink a large glass of water. And another. He began to suspect that he was hungover. Why was he hungover? Had he been drinking the night before? He supposed that he must have been. He caught a glint in the shaving mirror. Yellow, he thought, and stomped onto the bedroom. He stood and thought. The pub, he thought. Oh dear, the pub. He vaguely remembered being angry about something that seemed important. He'd been telling people about it at great length. He rather suspected his clearest visual recollection was of glazed looks on other people's faces. Something about new bypass he just found about. It had been in the pipeline for months, only no one seemed to have known about. Ridiculous. He took a swig of water. It would sort itself out, he decided. No one wanted a bypass. The council didn't have a leg to stand on. Oh, I lost my words. It would sort itself out. God, what a terrible hangover it earned him, though. He looked at himself in the wardrobe mirror. He stuck out his tongue. Yellow, he thought. The word yellow wandered his mind in search of something to connect with. 15 seconds later, he was out of the house and lying in front of a big yellow bulldozer that was fancying up his garden path. Mr. L. Proser was, as they say, only human. In other words, he was a carbon-based bipedal life form descended from an ape. More specifically, he was 40, fat, and shabby, and worked for the local council. Curiously enough, though he didn't know it, he was also a direct male-line descendant of Genghis Khan. Though intervening generations and racial mixing had so juggled his genes that he had no discernible Mongoloid characteristics, and the only vestiges left in Mr. L. Prosser of his mighty ancestry was a pronounced stoutness about the tongue, and a predilection for little fur hats. He is by no means a great warrior. In fact, he was a nervous, worried man. Today he was particularly nervous and worried because something had gone seriously wrong with his job, which was to see that Arthur Dent's house got cleared out of the way before the day was out. Come off it, Mr. Dent. You can't win, you know. You can't lie in front of the bulldozer indefinitely. He tried to make his eyes blaze fiercely, but they just wouldn't do it. Arthur lay in the mud and scratched at him. I'm game, he said. We'll see who runs first. I bet Russ first. Sorry. I'm afraid you're going to have to accept it, said Mr. Prosser, gripping his fur hat and rolling around the top of his head. This bypass has got to be built, and it's going to be built. First I've heard of it, said Arthur. Why's it got to be built? Mr. Foster shook his finger at him for a bit, then stopped and put it away again. What do you mean why it's got to be built? It's a bypass. You got to build bypasses. Bypasses are devices that allow some people to dash from point A to point B very fast, while other people dash from point B to point A very fast. People living at point C, being a point directly in between, are often given to wonder what's so great about point A that so many people from point B are so keen to get there, and what's so great about point B that so many people from point A are so keen to get there. They often wish the people would just once and for all work out where the hell they wanted to be. Mr. Foster wanted to be at point D. Point D was anywhere in particular. It was just any convenient point a long way from point A. Points A, B, and C. He would have a nice little cottage at point D with access over the door and spent a pleasant amount of time at point E, which would be the nearest pub to point D. His wife, of course, wanted climbing roses, but he wanted axes. He didn't know why, he just liked axes. He flushed hotly under the derisive grins over the bulldozer drivers. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, but was equally uncomfortable on each. Obviously, somebody had been appallingly incompetent, and he hoped to God it wasn't him. Mr. Prosser said, you were quite entitled to make any suggestions or protests at the appropriate time, you know. Appropriate time, hooted Arthur. Appropriate time? The first I knew about was when a workman arrived at my home yesterday. I asked him if he'd come to clean to windows, and he said no, he'd come to demolish the house. He didn't tell me straight away at first. Oh no, first he wiped a couple windows and charged me $5. Then he told me, but Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months. Oh yes, well as soon as I heard, I went straight round to see them. Yesterday afternoon, you hadn't exactly gone out of your way to call and touch them, had you? I mean, like actually telling anybody or anything. But the plans were on display. On display? I eventually had to go down to the cellar to find them. That's the display department, with a flashlight. Ah, well, the lights had probably gone, so I had the stairs. You found the notice, did you? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet, stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, Beware of the leopard. A cloud passed overhead. It cast a shadow over Arthur Dent as he lay propped up on his elbow in the cold mud. It cast a shadow over Arthur Dent's house. Mr. Prosser frowned at it. It's not as if it's a particularly nice house, he said. I'm sorry, but I happen to like it. You'll like the bypass. Oh, shut up, said Arthur Dent. Shut up and go away and take your bloody bypass with you. You haven't got a leg to stand on and you know it. Mr. Prosser's mouth opened and closed a couple times while his mind was for a moment filled with inexplicable but terribly attractive visions of Arthur Dent's house being consumed with fire, and Arthur himself running, screaming from the blazing room, with at least 3 hefty spears proceeding from his back. Mr. Prosser was often bothered with visions like these, and they made him feel very nervous. He stuttered for a moment and then pulled himself together. Mr. Dent, he said. Hello, yes, said Arthur. Some factual information for you. Have you any idea how much damage that bulldozer would suffer if I just let it roll straight over you? How much? Said Arthur. None at all, said Mr. Prosser, and stormed nervously off, wondering why his brain was filled with 1,000 hairy horsemen all shouting at him. By a curious coincidence, none at all is exactly how much suspicion the ape descendant Arthur Dent had that one of his closest friends was not descended from an ape, but was in fact from a small plant somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse, I think. And not from Guildford as he usually claimed. Well, it is a Beetlejuice. It might be it is Beetlejuice. Silly me. No, enough Guildford as he usually claimed, Arthur Dent had never, ever suspected this. This friend of his had first arrived on planet Earth some 15 Earth years previously, and he had worked hard to blend himself into Earth society with, it must be said, some success. For instance, he had spent those 15 years pretending to be an out-of-work actor, which was plausible enough. He had made one careless blunder, though, because he had skimmed a bit on his preparatory research. The information he had gathered had led him to choose the name Ford Prefect as being nicely inconspicuous. He was not conspicuously tall, his features were striking, but not conspicuously handsome. His hair was wiry and gingerish and brushed backward from the temples. His skin seemed to be pulled backward from the nose. There was something very slightly odd about him. What was difficult to say what it was. Perhaps it was that his eyes didn't seem to blink often enough when you talked to him for any length of time. Your eyes began to involuntarily to water on his behalf. Perhaps it was that he smiled slightly too broadly and gave people the unnerving impression that he was about to go for their neck. He struck most of the friends he had made on Earth as an eccentric, but a harmless one, an unruly boozer with some artish habits. For instance, he would often gatecrash university parties, get badly drunk, and start making fun of any astrophysicist he could find till he got thrown out. Sometimes he would get seized with oddly distracted moods and stare into the sky as if hypnotized, and someone asked him what he was doing. Then would start guiltily for a moment and relax and grin. Oh, just looking for flying saucers. He would joke, and everyone would laugh and ask him what sort of flying saucers he was looking for. Green ones, he would reply with a wicked grin. Laugh wildly for a moment, and then suddenly lunge from the nearest bar and buy an enormous round of drinks. Evenings like this usually ended badly. Ford would get out of his skull and whiskey, huddle in a corner with some girl, and explain to her in a slurred phrases that honestly the color of the flying saucers didn't matter that much, really. Thereafter, staggering semi-paralytic down the night streets, he would often ask passing policemen if they knew the way to Beetlejuice. The policeman would usually say something like, "Don't you think it's about time you went off home, sir?" "I'm trying to, baby. I'm trying to," is what Ford invariably replied on those occasions. In fact, what he was really looking for when he stared distractedly into the sky was any kind of flying saucer at all. The reason he said green was that green was the traditional space livery of the Beetlejuice trading scouts. Ford Prefect was desperate that any flying saucer at all would arrive soon, because 15 years was a long time to get stranded anywhere, particularly somewhere as mind-bogglingly dull as the Earth. Ford wished that a flying saucer would arrive soon because he knew how to flag flying saucers down and get lifts from them. He knew how to see the marvels of the universe for less than $30 a day. In fact, Ford Prefect was a roving researcher for that wholly remarkable book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We got a title card! I say that, but that's only applicable in movies. Anyway. Human beings are great adapters, and by lunchtime, life in the environs of Arthur's house had settled into a steady routine. It was Arthur's accepted role to lie squelching in the mud, making occasional demands to see his lawyer, his mother, or a good book. It was Mr. Prosser's accepted role to tackle Arthur with the occasional new ploy such as for the public good talk, or the merchant progress talk, the they knock my house down once, you know, never look back talk, and various other cajoleries and threats. And it was the bulldozer drivers' accepted role to sit around drinking coffee and experimenting with union regulations to see how they could turn the situation to their financial advantage. The Earth moved slowly in its diurnal course. The sun was beginning to dry out the mud that Arthur lay in. A shadow moved across him again. "Hello, Arthur," said the shadow. Arthur looked up, squinting into the sun, and was startled to see Ford Prefect standing above him. "Ford! Hello, how are you?" "Fine," said Ford. "Look, are you busy?" "Am I busy?" exclaimed Arthur. "Well, I've just got all these bulldozers and things to lie in front of me, because they'll knock my house down if I don't. But other than that, well, no, not especially." "Why?" They don't have sarcasm on Beetlejuice, and Ford Prefect often failed to notice it unless he was concentrating. He said, "Good. Is there anywhere we can talk?" "What?" said Arthur Dent. Blah. Words. For a few seconds, Ford seemed to ignore him and stared fixedly into the sky like a rabbit trying to get run over by a car. Then suddenly he squatted down beside Arthur. "We've got to talk," he said urgently. "Fine," said Arthur. "Talk." "And drink," said Ford. "It's vitally important that we talk and drink. Now, we'll go to the pub in the village." He looked into the sky again, nervous, expectant. "Look, don't you understand?" shouted Arthur. He pointed at Prosser. "That man wants to knock my house down." Ford glanced at him, puzzled. "Well, he can do it while you're away, can't he?" he asked. "But I don't want him to." "Ah. Look, what's the matter with you, Ford?" said Arthur. Nothing's the matter. Listen to me. I've got to tell you the most important thing you've ever heard. I've got to tell you now, and I've got to tell you in the saloon bar of the House and Groom. Horse and Groom, damn it. But why? Because you're going to need a very stiff drink. Ford stared at Arthur, and Arthur was astonished to find his will beginning to weaken. He didn't realize this was because of an old drinking game that Ford learned to play in the hyperspace ports that served the Imaginite mining belts in the star system of Orion Beta. The game was not unlike the Earth game called Indian Wrestling, and was played like this. Two contestants would sit either side of a table with a glass in front of each of them. Between them would be placed a bottle of Jack's spirit, as immortalized in the ancient Orion mining song. Oh, don't give me none more of that old Jack's spirit. No, don't you give me none more of that old Jack's spirit. For my head will fly, my tongue will lie, my eyes will fry, and I may die. Won't you pour me one more of that sinful old Jack's spirit? Each of the two contestants would then concentrate their will on the bottle and attempt to tip it and pour spirit into the glass of his opponent, who would then have to drink it. The bottle would then be refilled, the game would be played again and again. Once you start to lose, you would probably keep losing because one of the effects of Jack's spirit is to depress telepsychic power. As soon as the predetermined quantity has been consumed, the final loser would have to perform a forfeit, which was usually obscenely biological. Ford Prefect usually played to lose. Ford stared at Arthur, who began to think that perhaps he did want to go to the horse and groom after all. But what about my house? He asked plaintively. Ford looked across to Mr. Proser, and suddenly a wicked thought struck him. He wants to knock your house down. Yes, and he wants to build, and he can't because you're lying in front of his bulldozer? Yes, and I'm sure we can come to some arrangement, said Ford. Excuse me, he shouted. Mr. Proser, who was arguing with the spokesman for the bulldozer drivers about whether or not Arthur Dent constituted a mental health hazard and how much they should get paid if he did, looked around. He was surprised and slightly alarmed to see that Arthur had company. Yes, hello, he called. Has Mr. Dent come to his senses yet? Can we, for the moment, called Ford, assume that he hasn't? Well, sighed Mr. Proser. And can we also assume, said Ford, that he's going to be staying here all day? So all your men are going to be standing around all day doing nothing? Could be. Well, if you're resigned to doing that anyway, you don't actually need him to lie here all the time, do you? What? You don't, said Ford patiently, actually need him here. Mr. Prosser thought about this. Well, no, not as such, he said. Not exactly need. Prosser was worried. He thought that one of them wasn't making a lot of sense. Ford said, so if you just like to take it as read that he's actually here, and then he and I could slip off down to the pub for half an hour, how does that sound? Mr. Prosser thought about saying perfectly potty. That seems perfectly reasonable, he said in a reassuring tone of voice, wondering who he was trying to reassure. If you want to pop off for a quick one yourself later on, said Ford, we can always cover for you in return. Thank you very much, said Mr. Proser, who no longer knew how to play this at all. Thank you very much. Yes, that's very kind. He frowned and smiled, then tried to do both at once. Failed, grasped hold of his fur hat and rolled it fitfully around the top of his head. He could only assume that he had just won. So, continued Ford Prefect, if you'd just like to come over here and lie down. What? Said Mr. Proser. I'm sorry, said Ford. Perhaps I hadn't made myself fully clear. Somebody's got a lie in front of the bulldozers, haven't they? Well, there won't be anything to stop them driving into Mr. Dent's house, will there? What? Said Mr. Proser again. It's very simple, said Ford. My client, Mr. Dent, says that he will stop lying here in the mud on the sole condition that you come and take over from him. What are you talking about, said Arthur, but Ford nudged him with his shoe to be quiet. You want me, said Proser, spelling out this new thought to himself, to come and lie there? Yes. In front of the bulldozer? Yes. Instead of Mr. Dent? Yes. In the mud. In, as you say, the mud. As soon as Mr. Proser realized that he was substantially the loser after all, it was as if a weight lifted itself off his shoulders. This is more like the world as he knew it. He sighed. In return for which you would take Mr. Dent with you down to the pub. That's it, said Ford. That's it exactly. Mr. Proser took a few nervous steps forward and stopped. Promise, he said. Promise, said Ford. He turned to Arthur. Come on, he said to him. Get up and let that man lie down. Arthur stood up, feeling as if he was in a dream. Ford beckoned to Prosser, who sadly, awkwardly sat down in the mud. He felt that his whole life was some kind of dream, and he sometimes wondered whose it was and whether they were enjoying it. The mud folded itself around his bottoms and his arms and oozed into his shoes. Ford looked at him severely. And no sneaky knocking Mr. Dent's house down while he's away, all right? He said. The mere thought, growled Mr. Proser, hadn't even begun to speculate. He continued, selling himself back about the merest possibility of crossing my mind. He saw the bulldozer driver's union representative approaching and let his head sink back and closed his eyes. He was trying to marshal his arguments for proving that he did not now He did not now constitute a mental health hazard himself. He was far from certain about this. His mind seemed to be full of noises, hurt, horses, smoke, and the stench of blood. This always happened when he felt miserable or put upon, and he had never been able to explain it to himself. In a high dimension of which we know nothing about, the mighty Khan bellowed with rage. Mr. Froza only trembled slightly and whimpered. He began to feel little pricks of water behind his eyelids. Bureaucratic cock-ups, angry men lying in mud, indecipherable strangers handing out inexplicable humiliation, an unidentified army of horsemen laughing at him in his head. What a day. What a day, Ford Prefect knew that it didn't matter a pair of dingo's kidneys whether Arthur's house got knocked down or not down. Arthur remained very worried. But can we trust him? He said. Myself, I trust him to the end of the earth, said Ford. Oh yes, said Arthur, and how far is that? About 12 minutes away, said Ford. Come on, I need a drink. Chapter 2. Let me just take a sip. This is thirsty work. I love how my model just broke for a second. I'm sorry. Oh, is it breaking again? Here's what the Encyclopedia Galactica has to say about alcohol. It says that alcohol is a colorless, volatile liquid formed by the fermentation of sugars and also notes its intoxicating effect on certain carbon-based life forms. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy also mentions alcohol. It says that the best drink in existence is the Pan-Galactic Gurgle Blaster. Actually, give me 1 second, I'll be right back. I'm back, Vignon. Sorry about that. Let me cover where we last left off. Give me a second. Here we go. Sorry about that. It says that the effect of drinking a Pan-Galactic Gurgle Blaster is like having your brain smashed out by a sliced lemon wrapped around a large gold brick. The guide also tells you on which planets the best Pan-Galactic Gurgle Blasters are mixed, how much you can expect to pay for one, and what voluntary organizations exist to help you rehabilitate afterward. The guide even tells you how you can mix one yourself. Take the juice from one bottle of the old Jack Spirits, it says. Pour into 1 measure of water from the seas of Santraginus 5. Oh, that Santraginian seawater, it says. Oh, those Santraginian fish. Allow 3 cubes of Arcturan Megagene to melt into the mixture. It must be properly iced or the benzine is lost. Allow 4 liters of Phalian marsh gas to bubble through it in memory of all those happy bikers who have died of pleasure in the marshes of Phalia. No, happy hikers, my bad. Over the back of a silver spoon float a measure of Galactan hypermint extract, redolent of all the beady odors of the dark Galactan zones, subtle, sweet, and mystic. Drop in the tube of an Algolian sun tiger, watch it dissolve, spreading the fires of the Algolian suns deep into the heart of the drink. Sprinkle Zamphor, and add an olive, drink, but very carefully. You hear that, Vignon? Drink very carefully. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sells rather better than the Encyclopedia Galactica. 6 pints of bitter, said Ford Prefect to the barman of the Horse and Groom, and quickly please, the world's about to end. The barman of the Horse and Groom didn't deserve this sort of treatment. He was a dignified old man. He pushed his glasses up his nose and blinked at Ford Prefect. Ford ignored him and stared out the window. So the barman looked instead at Arthur, who shrugged helplessly and said nothing. So the barman said, "Oh, Oh yes, sir. Nice weather for it, and started pulling pints. He tried again. Going to watch the match this afternoon, then? Ford glanced round at him. No, no point, he said, and looked back out the window. What's that? Foregone conclusion, then, you reckon, sir? Said the barman. Arsenal without a chance? No, no, said Ford. It's just that the world's about to end. Oh, yes, sir. So you said the barman, looking over his glasses this time at Arthur. Lucky escape for Arsenal if it did. Ford looked back at him, genuinely surprised. No, not really, he said. He frowned. The barman breathed in heavily. There you are, sir. 6 pints, he said. Arthur smiled at him wanly and shrugged again. He turned and smiled wanly at the rest of the pub, just in case any of them had heard what was going on. None of them had, and none of them could understand what he was smiling at them for. A man sitting next to Ford at the bar looked at the two men, looked at the six pipes, did a swift burst of mental arithmetic, arrived at an answer he liked, and grinned a stupid, hopeful grin at them. Get off, said Ford. They're ours, giving him a look that would have made an Algolian sun tiger get on with what it was doing. Ford slapped a £5 note on the bar and he said, Keep the change. What, from a fiver? Thank you, sir. You got 10 minutes left to spend it. The barman decided simply to walk away for a bit. Ford, said Arthur, would you please tell me what the hell is going on? Drink up, said Ford. You've got 3 pints to get through. 3 pints, said Arthur, at lunchtime. The man next to Ford grinned and nodded happily. Ford ignored him. He said, Time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so. Very deep, said Arthur. You should send that in to the Reader's Digest. They've got page for people like you. Drink up. Why 3 pints all of a sudden? Muscle relaxing. You'll need it. Muscle relaxing? Muscle relaxing. Arthur stared into his beer. Did I do anything wrong today, he said, or has the world always been like this and I've been too wrapped up in myself to notice? All right, said Ford, I'll try to explain. How long have we known each other? How long? About 5 years, maybe 6, he said. Most of it seemed to make some kind of sense at the time. All right, said Ford, how would you react if I said I'm not from Guildford after all, but from a small plant somewhere in the vicinity of Beetlejuice? Arthur shrugged in a so-so sort of way. I don't know, he said, taking a pull of beer. Why, do you think it's the sort of thing you're likely to say? Ford gave up. It really wasn't worth bothering at the moment. What with the world being about to end, he just said, drink up. A stretch. Okay, thank you, Miwa. I'll go ahead and do that in 1 sec. Arthur gave the rest of the pub another wan smile. The rest of the pub frowned at him. A man waved at him to stop smiling at them and mind his own business. This must be Thursday, said Arthur to himself, sinking low over his beer. I never could get the hang of Thursdays. And stretch. Big stretch. Thank you. I appreciate ya. Alright, let me take a sip. Again, I apologize for my model going wonky with how I'm reading and having my eyes closed, but I do have to look down at the book. Sorry. I hope everyone's doing well and everyone's had a good Saturday. Well, Saturday. Chapter 3. On this particular Thursday, something was moving quietly through the ionosphere many miles above the surface of the planet. Several somethings, in fact. Several dozen huge, yellow, chunky, slab-like somethings. Huge as office blocks, silent as birds. They sort of ease, basking electromagnetic rays from the star soul, biding their time, grouping, preparing. The planet beneath them was almost perfectly oblivious of their presence, which was just how they wanted it for the moment. The huge yellow something went unnoticed at Goonhilly. They passed over Cape Canaveral without a blip. Woomera and Joe Bank looked straight through them, which was a pity because it was exactly the sort of thing they'd been looking for all these years. The only place they registered at all was on a small black device called a sub-ethosensomatic, which winked away quietly to itself. It nestled in the darkness inside a leather satchel which Ford Prefect habitually wore slung around his neck. The contents of Ford Prefect's satchel were quite interesting. In fact, it would have made any Earth physicist's eyes pop out of his head. Which is why he always concealed them by keeping a couple of dog-eared scripts for plays he pretended he was auditioning for, stuffed in the top. Besides the sub-ethosensomatic and the scripts he had an electric thumb, a short, squat black rod, smooth and matte with a couple flat switches and dials at one end. He also had a device that looked rather like a largest electronic calculator. This had about 100 tiny flat press buttons and a screen about 4 inches square on which any of a million pages could be summoned at a moment's notice. It looked insanely complicated, and this was one of the reasons why the snug plastic cover it fit into had the words "Don't Panic" printed on it in large friendly letters. The other reason was that this device was in fact the most remarkable of all books ever to come out of the great publishing corporation of Ursa Minor, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The reason why it was published in the form of a micro sub-meso electronic component is if it was printed in normal book form, an interstellar hitchhiker would require several inconveniently large buildings to carry it around in. That's a big book, yeah. Beneath this, in Ford's prefix satchel, were a few ballpoints, a notepad, and a largest bath towel from Marks and Spencer's. Congrats, Miwa. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has a few things to say on the subject of towels. A towel, it says, is about the most massively useful thing an interstellar hitchhiker can have. Partly it has great practical value. You can wrap it around you for warmth as you bound across the cold moons of Jaglin Beta. You can lie on it on the brilliant marble sand beach of Santraginius 5, inhaling the heady sea vapors. You can sleep under it beneath the stars which shine so redly on the desert world of Kakrafoom. Use it to sail a mini-raft down the slow, heavy river moth. Wear it for use in hand-to-hand combat. Wrap it around your head to ward off noxious fumes or avoid the gaze of the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Troll. A mind-bogglingly stupid animal, it assumes that if you can't see it, it can't see you. Daft as a brush, but very, very ravenous. You can wave your towel in emergencies as a distress signal. And of course, dry yourself off of it if it still seems to be clean enough. More importantly, a towel has immense psychological value. For some reason, if a strag, non-hitchhiker, discovers that a hitchhiker has his towel with him, he will automatically assume that he is also in possession of a toothbrush, washcloth, soap, tin of biscuits, flask, compass, map, ball of string, gnat spray, wet weather gear, spacesuit, etc., etc. Furthermore, the strag will then happily lend the hitchhiker any of these or a dozen other items the hitchhiker might accidentally have lost. What the strag will think is that any man who can hitch the length and breadth of the galaxy, rough it, slum it, struggle against terrible odds, win through, and still know where his towel is clearly a man to be reckoned with. Hence a phrase that is patched into hitchhiking slang as in, hey, you sass that hoopy Ford prefect, there's a fruit who really knows where his towel is. Yes. Know, be aware of, meet, have sex with, hoopy, really together guy, fruit, really amazingly together guy. Nice. Nestling quietly on top of the tower in Ford prefix satchel, the sub-FS and somatic begin to wink more quickly. Miles above the surface of the planet, the huge yellow somethings begin to fan out. At Jojo Bank, someone decided it was time for a nice, relaxing cup of tea. You got a towel with you? Said Ford suddenly to Arthur. Arthur, struggling through his third pint, looked round at him. Why? What? No. Should I have? He'd given up being surprised. There didn't seem to be any point any longer. Ford clicked his tongue in irritation. Drink up, he urged. At that moment, the dull sound of a rumbling crash from outside filtered through the low murmur of the pub. Through the sound of the jukebox, through the sound of the man next to Ford hiccuping over the whiskey Ford had eventually bought him. Arthur choked on his beer, leaped to his feet. What's that? He yelped. Don't worry, said Ford. They haven't stirred yet. Thank God for that, said Arthur, and relaxed. It's probably just your house being knocked down, said Ford, downing his last pint. What? Shouted Arthur. Suddenly Ford's spell was broken. Arthur looked wildly around him and ran to the window. My God, they are! They're knocking my house down! What the hell am I doing in the pub, Ford? It hardly makes any difference at this stage, said Ford. Let them have their fun. Fun! Yelped Arthur. Fun! He quickly checked out the window again that they were talking about the same thing. Damn their fun! He hooted and ran out of the pub, fiercely waving a nearly empty beer glass. He made no friends at all in the pub that lunchtime. Stop, you vandals, you home records, bawled Arthur. You half-crazed Visigoths, stop, will you? Ford would have to go after him. Turning quickly to the barman, he asked for 4 packets of peanuts. Doing good, Miwa. Hope you're doing well. There you are, sir, said the barman, stacking the packets on the bar. 28 pence, if you'd be so kind. Ford was very kind. He gave the barman another £5 note and told him to keep the change. The barman looked at it and then looked at Ford. He suddenly shivered. He experienced a momentary sensation that he didn't understand, because no one on Earth had ever experienced it before. In moments of great stress, every life form that exists gives out a tiny subliminal signal. The signal simply communicates an exact and almost pathetic sense of how far that being is from the place of his birth. On Earth, it is never possible to be further than 16,000 miles from your birthplace, which really isn't very far, so such signals are too minute to be noticed. Ford Prefect was at this moment under great stress, and he was born 600 light years away in the near vicinity of Beetlejuice. The barman reeled for a moment, hit by a shocking, incomprehensible sense of distance. He didn't know what it meant, but he looked at Ford Prefect with a new sense of respect, almost awe. "Are you serious, sir?" He said in a small voice had the effect of silencing the pup. "You think the world's going to end?" "Yes," said Ford, "but this afternoon." Ford had recovered himself. He was at his flippest. "Yes," he said gaily. "In less than 2 minutes, I would estimate." The merman couldn't believe this conversation he was having, but he couldn't believe the sensation he had just had either. "Isn't there anything we can do about it then?" he said. "No, nothing," said Ford, stuffing the peanuts into his pocket. Someone in the hushed bar suddenly laughed raucously at how stupid everyone had become. The man sitting next to Ford was a bit sozzled by now. His eyes weaved their way up to Ford. "I thought you said that if the war was going to end, we were meant to lie down or put a paper bag over your head or something." "If you like, yes," said Ford. "That's what they told us in the army," said the man, and his eyes began the long trek back toward his whiskey. "Will that help?" asked the barman. "No," said Ford, and gave him a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said. "I've got to go." With a wave, he left. The pub was silent for a moment longer, and then, embarrassingly enough, the man with the raucous laugh did again. The girl he had dragged along to the pub with him had grown to loathe him dearly over the last hour. It would probably have been a great satisfaction to her to know that in a minute and a half or so he would suddenly evaporate into a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. However, when the moment came, she would be too busy evaporating herself to notice it. The barman cleared his throat. He heard himself say, "Last orders, please." The huge yellow machines began to sink downward and to move faster. Ford knew they were there. This wasn't the way he had wanted it. Running up the lane, Arthur had nearly reached his house. He didn't notice how cold it had suddenly become. He didn't notice the wind. He didn't notice the sudden, irrational squall of rain. He didn't notice anything. But the caterpillar bulldozers crawling over the rubble that had been his home. "You barbarians!" he yelled. "I'll sue the council for every penny it's got. I'll have you hung, drawn, and quartered, and whipped, and boiled until you've had enough." Ford was running after him very fast. Very, very fast. "And I would do it again," yelled Arthur. "And when I finished, I would take all the little bits and I would jump on them." Arthur didn't notice that the men were running from the bulldozers. He didn't notice that Mr. Prosser was staring hectically into the sky. What Mr. Prosser had noticed was that huge yellow somethings were screaming through the clouds. Impossibly huge yellow somethings. "And I would carry on jumping them," yelled Arthur, still running, "until I get blisters or I could think of anything even more unpleasant to do. And then—" Arthur tripped and fell headlong, rolled, and landed flat on his back. At last he noticed that something was going on. His finger shot upward. "What the hell's that?" he shrieked. Whatever it was raced across the sky in monstrous yellowness, tore the sky apart with mind-boggling noise, and leaped off into the distance, leaving the gaping air to shut behind it with a pang that drove your ears 6 feet into your skull. Another one followed and did exactly the same thing, only louder. It's difficult to say exactly what the people on the surface of the planet were doing now, because they didn't really know what they were doing themselves. None of it made a lot of sense. Running into houses, running out of houses, howling noisily at the noise, all around the world. All around the world, cities, streets exploded with people. Cars skidded into each other as noise fell on them and then rolled off like a tidal wave over hills and valleys, deserts and oceans, seeming to flatten everything it hit. Only one man stood and watched the sky, stood with terrible sadness in his eyes and rubber bungs in his ears. He knew exactly what was happening and had known it ever since his sub-Ethasenzo-matic had stood winking in the dead of night beside his pillow and awakened him with a start. It was where he waited for all these years, but when he had deciphered the signal pattern, sitting alone in his small dark room, a coldness had gripped him and squeezed his heart. Of all the races in all of the galaxy who could have come and said a big hello to planet Earth, he thought, didn't it just have to be the Vogons? Still, he knew what he had to do. As the Vogon craft screamed through the air high above him, he opened his satchel. He threw away a copy of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. He threw away a copy of Godspell. He wouldn't need them where he was going. Everything was ready. Everything was prepared. He knew where his tower was. Let me take a sip. Oh my gosh, I just noticed. Thank you so much for the follow, me Wamera. I'm so sorry I didn't see that before. I'm so sorry, yeah. Sorry, I had a big yawn. Big yawn. Okay. A sudden silence in the earth. It was anything. If anything, it was worse than the noise. For a while, nothing happened. The great ships hung motionless in the sky. Over every nation on earth, motionless they hung, huge, heavy, steady in the sky, a blasphemy against nature. Many people went straight into shock as their minds tried to encompass what they were looking at. The ships hung in the sky in much the same way that bricks don't, and still nothing happened. Then there was a slight whisper, a sudden spacious whisper of open ambient sound. Every hi-fi set in the world, every radio, every television, every cassette recorder, every woofer, every tweeter, every mid-range driver in the world quietly turned itself on. Every tin can, every dustbin, every window, every car, every wine glass, every sheet of rusty metal became activated as an acoustically perfect sounding board. Before the Earth passed away, it was going to be treated to the very ultimate in sound reproduction, the greatest public address system ever built. But there was no concert, no music, no fanfare, just a simple message. People of Earth, your attention, please, a voice said. It was wonderful, perfect quadraphonic sound with distortion that was so low as to make a brave man weep. This is Frosting Fogan Jolts of the Galactic Hyperspace Planning Council, the voice continued. As you will no doubt be aware, the plans for development of the outlying regions of the galaxy require the building of a hyperspatial express route through your star system, and invariably your planet is one of those scheduled for demolition. The process would take slightly less than 2 of your Earth minutes. Thank you. The PI died away. Uncomprehending terror settled on the watching people of Earth. The terror moved slowly through the gathered crowds as if they were iron filings on a sheet of board and a magnet was moving beneath them. Panic spiraled again. Desperate, fleeting panic, but there was nowhere to flee to. Observing this, the Vogans turned on their P again. It said, There's no point acting all surprised about it. All planning turrets and demolition orders have been on display in your local planning department in Alpha Centauri for 50 of your Earth years, so you've had plenty of time to lodge any formal complaint, and it's far too late to start making a fuss about it now. The PA fell silent again, and its echo drifted across the land. The huge ships turned slowly in the sky with easy power. On the underside of each, a hatchway opened, an empty black square. By this time, somebody somewhere must have manned a radio transmitter, located a wavelength, and broadcast a message back to the Fogon ships to plead on behalf of the planet. Nobody ever heard what they said. They only heard the reply. The PA slammed back into life again. The voice was annoyed. Said, What do you mean you've never been to Alpha Centauri? For heaven's sake, mankind, it's only 4 light years away, you know. I'm sorry, if you can't be bothered to take an interest in local affairs, that's your own lookout. Energized demolition beams. Light poured out of the hatchways. I don't know, said the voice on the PA. Apathetic, bloody planet. I've no sympathy at all. It cut off. There was a terribly ghastly silence. There was a terribly ghastly noise. There was a terribly ghastly silence. The Fogon constructor fleet coasted away into the inky, starry void. Touching. Scary. Chapter 4. Far away in the opposite spiral of the galaxy, 500,000 light-years from the star Sol, Zaphold Beeblebrox, president of the Imperial Galactic Government, sped across the seas of Damogran, his ion drive delta bolt winking and flashing in the Damogran sun. Damogran was hot. Damogran the remote. Damogran the almost totally unheard of. Damogran the secret home of the Herd of Gold. The boat sped on across the water. It would be some time before it reached its destination, because Damogran is such an inconveniently arranged planet. It consists of nothing but middling to large desert islands, separated by very pretty but annoyingly wide stretches of ocean. The boat sped on. Because of this topographical awkwardness, Damogran has always remained a deserted planet. This is why the Imperial Galactic Government chose Damogran for the Heart of Gold project, because it was so deserted and the Heart of Gold project was so secret. The boat zipped and skipped across the sea that lay between the main islands, the only archipelago of any useful size on the whole planet. Zaphold Beeblebrox was on his way from the tiny spaceport on Easter Island. The name was an entirely meaningless coincidence. In galactic speak, Easter means small, flat, and light brown, to the Heart of Gold Island, which by another meaningless coincidence was called France. One of the side effects of work on the Heart of Gold was a whole string of pretty meaningless coincidences. But it was not in any way a coincidence that today, the day of culmination of the project, the great day of unveiling, the day that the Heart of Gold was finally to be introduced to a marveling galaxy, was also a great day of culmination for Zaphod Beeblebrox. It was for the sake of this day that he had first decided to run for the presidency, a decision that had sent shock waves of astonishment throughout the Imperial Galaxy. Zaphod Beeblebrox, president? Not the Zaphod Beeblebrox, not the president. Many has seen it as clinching proof that the whole of known creation had finally gone bananas. Zaphod grinned and gave the boat an extra kick of speed. Zaphod Beaverbrox, adventurer, ex-hippie, good timer, crook, quite possibly. Manic, self-publicist, terrible, bad personal relationships, often thought to be completely out to lunch. President? No one had gone bananas, not in that way at least. Only 6 people in the entire galaxy understood the principle in which the galaxy was governed, and they knew that once Zaphod Beaverbrox had announced his intention to run as president, it was more or less a fait accompli. He was ideal presidency father. What they completely failed to understand was why Zaphod was doing it. He banked sharply, shooting a wild wall of water at the sun. Today was the day. Today was the day when they realized what Zaphod had been up to. Today was what Zaphod Beeblebrox's presidency was all about. Today was also his 200th birthday, but that was just another meaningless coincidence. As he skipped his boat across the seas of Demogran, he smiled quietly to himself about what a wonderful, exciting day it was going to be. He relaxed and spread his 2 arms lazily along the seat back. He steered with an extra arm he recently had fitted just beneath his right one to help improve his ski boxing. Then we have a little note here from the book itself telling you what the President of the Imperial Galactic Government is. President, full title, President of the Imperial Galactic Government. The term Imperial is kept, though it is now an anachronism. The hereditary emperor is nearly dead and has been for many centuries. In the last moments of his dying coma, he was locked in a stasis field which keeps him in a state of perpetual unchangingness. All his heirs are now long dead, and this means that without any drastic political upheaval, power has simply and effectively moved a rung or two down the ladder. It is now seen to be vested in a body that used to act simply as advisors to the emperor, and elected governmental assembly head by a president elected by that assembly. In fact, it vests in no such place. The president in particular is very much a figurehead. He wields no real power whatsoever. He's apparently chosen by the government, but the qualities he's required to display are not those of leadership, but those of finely judged outrage. For this reason, the president is always a controversial choice, always an infuriating but fascinating character. His job is not to wield power, but to draw attention away from it. On those criteria, Zaphod Beeblebrox is one of the most successful presidents the galaxy has ever had. He has already spent 2 of his 10 presidential years in prison for fraud. Very, very few people realize that the president and the government have virtually no power at all, and of these few people, only 6 know whence ultimate political power is wielded. Most of the others secretly believe that the ultimate decision-making process is handled by a computer. They couldn't be more wrong. Let me take a sip. Sorry about that, I had to take that sip. Hey, he cooed to himself. You're a real cool boy, you. But his nerves sang a song shriller than a dog whistle. The island of France was about 20 miles long, 5 miles across the middle, sandy and crescent-shaped. In fact, it seemed to exist not so much as an island in its own right, as simply a means of defining the sweep and curve of a huge bay. This impression was heightened by the fact that the inner coastline of the crescent consisted almost entirely of steep cliffs. From the top of the cliffs, the land sloped slowly down 5 miles to the opposite shore. On top of the cliffs stood a reception committee. It consisted in large part of the engineers and researchers who had built the Heart of Gold, mostly humanoid, but here and there were a few reptiloid, automaneers, 2 or 3 green sylph-like, maxi-megagalacticians, and octopodic physiculturist, or 2 in a hulavoo. Hulavoo is a super intelligent shade of the color blue. Okay. All except the hulavoo were resplendent in their multicolored ceremonial lab coats. The hulavoo had been temporarily refracted into a freestanding prism for the occasion. There was a mood of immense excitement thrilling through all of them. Together in between... Let's see, I lost one word. Together in between, they had gone them they had gone to and beyond the furthest limits of physical laws, restructured the fundamental fabric of matter, strained, twisted, and broken the laws of possibility and impossibility, but still the greatest excitement of all seemed to be meet a man with an orange sash around his neck. And an orange sash was what the president of the galaxy traditionally wore. It might not even have made much of a difference to them if they'd known exactly how much power the president of the galaxy actually wielded. None at all. Only 6 people in the galaxy knew that the job of the galactic president was not to wield power, but to attract attention away from it. Zaphod Beeblebrox was amazingly good at his job. The crowd gasped, dazzled by sun and seamanship as the presidential speedboat zipped around the headland into the bay. It flashed and shone as it came skating over the sea in wide skidding turns. In fact, it didn't need to touch the water at all because it was supported on a hazy cushion of ionized atoms, but just for effect it was fitted with thin fin blades which could be lowered into the water. They slashed sheets of water hissing into the air, carved deep gashes in the sea which swayed crazily and sank back foaming in the boat's wake as it careered across the bay. Zaphod loved effect. It was what he was best at. He twisted the wheel sharply. The boat skidded round in a wild, scything skid beneath the cliff face and dropped to rest lightly on the rocking waves. Within seconds, he ran out onto the deck and waved and grinned at over 3 billion people. The 3 billion people weren't actually there, but they watched his every gesture through the eyes of a small robot Tri-D camera which hovered obsequiously in the air nearby. The antics of the president always made amazingly popular Tri-D. That's what they were for. He grinned again. 3 billion and 6 people didn't know it, but today would be a bigger antic than anyone had bargained for. The robot camera homed in for a close-up on the more popular of his 2 heads, and he waved again. He was roughly humanoid in appearance, except for the extra head and 3rd arm. His fair tousled hair stuck out in random directions. His blue eyes glinted with something completely unidentifiable, and his chins were almost always unshaven. A 20-foot-high transparent globe floated next to his boat, rolling and bobbing, glistening in the brilliant sun. Inside it floated a wide semicircular sofa upholstered in glorious red leather. The more the globe bobbed and rolled, the more the sofa stayed perfectly still, steady as an upholstered rock. Again, all done for effect as much as anything. Okay, thank you for the houseplant, Morgan. Drink blood. Drink blood. Posture check. And stretch. Big stretch. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Alrighty, back to the book. After I try to find it. Okay. Zaphod stepped through the wall of the globe and relaxed on the sofa. He spread his 2 arms along the back and with the 3rd brushed some dust off his knee. His head looked about. Smiling, he put his feet up. At any moment, he thought he might scream. Water boiled up beneath the bubble. It seethed and spouted. The bubble climbed, The bubble surged into the air, bobbing and rolling up on the waterspout. Up it climbed, throwing stilts of light at the cliff. Up it surged on the jet, the water falling from beneath it, crashing back into the sea hundreds of feet below. Zaphod smiled, picturing himself. A thoroughly ridiculous form of transport, but a thoroughly beautiful one. At the top of the cliff was the globe. At the top of the cliff, the globe wavered for a moment, tipped onto a railed ramp, rolled down it to a small concave platform, and riddled to a halt. To tremendous applause, Zaphod Beeblebrox stepped out of the bubble, his orange slash blazing the light. The president of the galaxy had arrived. He waited for the applause to die down, then raised his hand in greeting. "Hi," he said. A government spider sidled up to him and attempted to press a copy of his prepared speech into his hands. Pages 3 to 7 of the original version were at the moment floating soggily on the Damagran Sea, some 5 miles out from the bay. Pages 1 and 2 had been salvaged by a Damagran, frond-crested eagle, and had already become incorporated into an extraordinary new form of nest which the eagle had invented. It was constructed largely of papier-mâché. It was virtually impossible for a newly hatched baby eagle to break out of it. The Damagran, frond-crested eagle had heard of the notion of survival of the species, but wanted no truck with it. Zaphod Beeblebrox would not be needing his set speech, and he gently deflected the one being offered him by the spider. "Hi," he said again. Everyone beamed at him, or at least nearly everyone. He singled out Trillian from the crowd. Trillian was a girl that Zaphod had picked up recently while visiting a planet just for fun, incognito. She was slim, darkish, humanoid with long waves of black hair, a full mouth, an odd limb knob of a nose, and ridiculously brown eyes. Excuse me. With her red headscarf not in that particular way and her long, flowing, silky brown dress, she looked vaguely Arabic. Not that anyone there had ever heard of an Arab, of course. The Arabs had very recently ceased to exist, and even when they had existed, they were 500,000 light years from Damagran. Trillian wasn't anybody in particular, or so Zaphod had claimed. She just went around from rather a lot and told him what she thought of him. "Hi, honey," he said to her. She flashed him a quick, tight smile and looked away. Then she looked back for a moment and smiled more warmly, but by this time he was looking at something else. "Hi," he said to the small knot of creatures in the press who were standing nearby, wishing that he would stop saying hi and get on with the quotes. He grinned at them particularly because he knew that in a few moments he'd be giving them one hell of a quote. The next thing he said, though, was not a lot of use to them. One of the officials of the party had irritably decided the president was clearly not in a mood to read the deliciously turned speech that had been written for him, and flipped the switch on the remote control device in his pocket. Away in front of them, a huge white dome that bulged against the sky, cracked down the middle, split, and slowly folded itself down into the ground. Everyone gasped, although they had known perfectly well it was going to do that because they built it in that way. Beneath it lay an uncovered huge starship, 150 meters long, shaped like a sleek running shoe, perfectly white and mind-bogglingly beautiful. At the heart of it, unseen, lay a small gold box which carried within it the most brain-wrenching device ever conceived, a device that made this starship unique in the history of the galaxy, a device after which the ship had been named the Heart of Gold. "Wow," said Zaphod being rocks to the Heart of Gold. There wasn't much else he could say. He said it again because he knew it would annoy the press. Wow. The crowd turned their faces back toward him expectantly. He winked at Trillian, who raised her eyebrows and widened her eyes at him. She knew what he was about to say and thought him a terrible show-off. "That is really amazing," he said. "That really is truly amazing. That is so amazingly amazing, I think I'd like to steal it." A marvelous presidential quote, absolutely true to form. The crowd laughed appreciatively, the newsmen gleefully punched buttons on the sub-ether newsmatics, and the president grinned. As he grinned, his heart screamed unbearably, and he fingered the small, parallelomatic bomb that nestled quietly in his pocket. Finally, he could bear it no more. He lifted his heads up to the sky, let out a wild whoop in major thirds, threw the bomb to the ground, and ran forward through the sea of suddenly frozen, beaming smiles. Hell of a way to steal something. Sorry, let me give me a second to. There we go. Chapter 5. Prosthetic Vogan Jones was not a pleasant sight, even for other Vogons. His highly domed nose rose high above his small, piggy forehead. His dark green, rubbery skin was thick enough for him to play the game of Vogan civil service politics and play it well, and waterproof enough for him to dive indefinitely at sea depths of down to 1,000 feet with no ill effects. Not that he ever went swimming, of course. His busy schedule would not allow it. He was the way he was because billions of years ago, when the Vogons had first grown out of the sluggish, primeval seas of Vogsphere, and land panting and heaving on the planet's virgin shores, when the first rays of the bright young Vogsol sun had shone across them that morning, it's as if the forces of evolution had simply given up on them there and then, and had turned aside in disgust, and written them off as an ugly and unfortunate mistake. They never evolved again. They should never have survived. The fact they did is some kind of tribute to the thick-willed, slug-brained stubbornness of these creatures. Evolution, they said to themselves. Who needs it? And what nature refused to do for them, they simply did without until such time as they were able to rectify the gross anatomical inconveniences with surgery. Meanwhile, the natural forces on the planet Vogsphere had been working overtime to make up for the earlier blunder. They brought forth scintillating, jeweled, scuttling crabs, which the Vogons ate, smashing their shells with iron mallets, tall aspirin trees of breathtaking slenderness and color, which the Vogons cut down and burned the crab meat with, elegant, gazelle-like creatures with silken coats and dewy eyes, which the Vogons would catch and sit on. They were no use as transport because their backs would snap instantly, but the Vogons sat in them anyway. Thus, the planet Vogsphere willed away the unhappy millennia until the Vogons suddenly discovered the principles of interstellar travel. For a few short Vogue years, every last Vogan has migrated to the Megabrantis cluster, the political hub of the galaxy, and now form the immensely powerful backbone of the Galactic Civil Service. They have attempted to acquire learning, they have attempted to acquire style and social graces, but in most respects, the modern Vogon is little different from his primitive forebears. Every year they import 27,000 scintillating jeweled scuttling crabs from the native planet, and while away a happy drunken night smash them to bits with iron mallets. Prosthetic Vogan Jones was a fairly typical Vogan, in that he was thoroughly vile. Also, he did not like hitchhikers. Somewhere in a small, dark cabin buried deep in the intestines of Verstenic Vulcan Jolt's flagship, a small match flared nervously. The owner of the match was not Vulcan, but he knew all about them and was right to be nervous. His name was Ford Prefect. He looked about the cabin, but could see very little. Strange, monstrous shadows loomed and leaped with a tiny flickering flame. But all was quiet. He breathed a silent thank you to the Dentresses. The Dentresses are an unruly tribe of gourmands, a wild but pleasant bunch whom the Vulcans had recently taken to employing as catering staff on their long-haul fleets, on the strict understanding that they keep themselves very much to themselves. This suited the Dentresses fine because they love Vulcan money, which is one of the hardest currencies in space, but loathe the Vulcans themselves. The only sort of a Vulcan a Dentress he'd like to see was an annoyed Vulcan. It was because of this tiny piece of information that Ford Prefect was not now a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. He heard a slight groan, but the light of the match he saw a heavy shape. We got a little extra here for Ford Prefect. Ford Prefect's original name is only pronounceable in an obscure Betelgeusian dialect, now virtually extinct. The Great Collapsing Hrung Disaster of Galves /C/year 03758, which wiped out all the old Praxel Beetle communities on Betelgeuse 7. Ford's father was the only man on the entire planet to survive the Great Collapsing Hrung Disaster by an extraordinary coincidence that he was never able to satisfactorily explain. The whole episode is shrouded in deep mystery. In fact, no one ever knew what a Hrung was, not why it had chosen to collapse on Betelgeuse 7 particularly. Ford's father, magnanimously waving aside the clouds of suspicion that had nevertheless settled around him, came to live on Betelgeuse 5, where he both fathered and unclad Ford in memory of his now dead race. He christened him in the ancient Praxel Beetle tongue. Because Ford never learned to say his original name, his father eventually died of shame, which is still a terminal disease in some parts of the galaxy. The other kids at school nicknamed him Ix, which in the language of Betelgeuse 5 translates as boy who is not able to satisfactorily to explain what a Hrung is, nor why it should choose to collapse on Betelgeuse 7. Ford saw a heavy shape on the floor. Moving slightly on the floor, quickly he shook the match out, reached in his pocket, found what he was looking for, and took it out. He ripped it open and shook it. He crashed on the floor. The shape moved again. Ford Prefect said, "I bought some peanuts." Arthur Dent moved and groaned again, muttering incoherently. "Here, have some," urged Ford, shaking the packet again. "If you've never been through a marrow transference beam, you probably lost some salt and protein. The beer you had should have cushioned your system a bit." Said Arthur Dent. He opened his eyes. "It's dark," he said. "Yes," said Ford Prefect. "It's dark." "No light," said Arthur Dent. "Dark, no light." One of the things Ford Prefect had always found hardest to understand about humans was the habit of continually stating and repeating the very, very obvious, as in it's a nice day. Well, you're very tall. Or, oh dear, you seem to have fallen down a 30-foot well. Are you all right? At first, Ford had formed a theory to account for this strange behavior. If human beings don't keep exercising their lips, he thought their mouths probably seize up. After a few months' consideration and observation, he abandoned this theory in favor of a new one. If they don't keep on exercising their lips, he thought, their brains start working. After a while, he abandoned this one as well as being objectively cynical and decided he quite liked human beings after all, but he always remained desperately worried about the terrible number of things they didn't know about. Yes, he agreed with Arthur. No light. He helped Arthur to his peanuts. "How do you feel?" he asked him. "Like a military academy," said Arthur. "Bits of me keep on passing out." Ford stared at him blankly in the darkness. "If I asked you where the hell we were," said Arthur weakly, "would I regret it?" Ford stood up. "We're safe," he said. "Oh, good," said Arthur. "We're in a small galley cabin," said Ford, "in one of the spaceships of the Vulcan constructor fleet." "Ah," said Arthur. "This is obviously some strange usage of the word safe that I wasn't previously aware of." "Oh no, you're right, Morgan. I did call you just 3 times. No." Ford struck another match to open the search for a light switch. Flip that. 1 sec. Sorry for the yawn, Evan. Let me take a sip. Monstrous shadows leaped and loomed again. Arthur struggled to his feet and hugged himself apprehensively. Hideous alien shapes seemed to throng about him. The air was thick with musty smells which siphoned into his lungs without identifying themselves, and a low, irritating hum kept his brain from focusing. How did we get here? He asked, shivering slightly. We hitched a lift, said Ford. Excuse me, said Arthur. Are you trying to tell me that we just stuck out our thumbs and some green-eyed bug monster stuck his head out and said, Hi, fellas, hop right in. I can take you as far as the Basing Stroke roundabout. Well, said Ford, the thumb's an electronic sub at the signaling device. The roundabout's at Barnard Star 6 light years away, but otherwise, that's more or less right. The bug-eyed monster? Is green, yes. Fine, said Arthur. When can I go home? You can't, said Ford Prefect, and found the light switch. Shade your eyes, he said, and turn it on. Even Ford was surprised. Good grief, said Arthur. Is this really the interior of a flying saucer? Prostatnik Vogan-Jeltz heaved his unpleasant green body around the control bridge. He always felt vaguely irritable after demolishing populated planets. He wished that someone would come and tell him that was all wrong so that he could shout them and feel better. He flopped as he hit as heavily as he could onto his control seat in the hope that it would break and give him something to be genuinely angry about, but only gave a complaining sort of creak. Try! He shouted at a young Vogan guard who entered the bridge at that moment. The guard vanished immediately, feeling rather relieved. He was glad it wouldn't now be him who delivered the report they had just received. The report was an official release which said that a wonderful new form of spaceship drive was at this moment being unveiled at a government research base on Demogran, which would henceforth make all hyperspatial express routes unnecessary. Another door slid open, but this time the Vogan captain didn't shout because it was the door from the galley quarters where the Neutrasis prepared his meals. A meal would be most welcome. A huge furry creature bounded through the door of his lunch tray. It was grinning like a maniac. Prostetnik Vogan-Jeltz was delighted. He knew that when Neutrasi was looked that pleased with itself, there was something going on somewhere on the ship that he could get very angry indeed about. Ford and Arthur stared around them. Well, what do you think? Said Ford. It's a bit squalid, isn't it? Ford frowned at the grubby mattresses, unwashed cups, and unidentifiable bits of smelly alien underwear that lay around the cramped cabin. Well, this is a working ship, you see, said Ford. These are the Neutrasi's sleeping quarters. Thought you said they were called the Vogons or something. Yes, said Ford. The Vogons are on the ship. The Neutrasis are the cooks. They let us on board. I'm confused, said Arthur. Here, have a look at this, said Ford. Excuse me. He sat down one of the mattresses and rummaged about in his satchel. Arthur prodded the mattresses nervously and then sat on it himself. In fact, he had very little to be nervous about, because all mattresses grown in the swamps of Squanchellus Zeta are very thoroughly killed and dried before being put to service. Very few ever come back to life again. Ford handed the book to Arthur. What is it? Asked Arthur. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a sort of electronic book. It tells you everything you need to know about anything. That's its job. Arthur turned it nervously in his hands. I like the cover, he said. Don't panic. It's the first helpful or not unintelligible thing anybody said to me all day. I'll show you how it works, said Ford. He snatched it from Arthur, who was still holding it as a 2-week dead lark, and pulled it out of its cover. You press this button here, you see, and the screen lights up, giving you the index. A screen about 3 inches by 4 lit up, and characters began to flicker across the surface. You want to know about Vogan, so I entered that name. So his fingers tapped some more keys, and there we are. The words Vogon Constructor Fleet flared in green across the screen. Ford pressed a large red button at the bottom of the screen, and words began to undulate across it. At the same time, the book began to speak the entry as well in a still, quiet, measured voice. This is what the book said. Vogon Constructor Fleets, here is what to do if you want to get a lift from a Vogon. Forget it. They are one of the most unpleasant races in the galaxy. Not actually evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They won't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Troll that were assigned a triplicate, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as fire lighters. The best way to get a drink out of a Vogan is to stick your finger down his throat, and the best way to irritate him is to feed his grandmother to the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Troll. On no account allow Vogan to read poetry at you. Excuse me. Arthur blinked at it. What a strange book. How did we get a lift then? That's the point. It's out of date now, said Ford, slamming the book back into its cover. I'm doing field research for the new revised edition, and one of the things I'll have to do is include a bit about how the Vogans now employ Dentresi cooks, which gives us a rather useful little loophole. A pain expression crossed Arthur's face. But who are the Dentresses? He said. Great guys, said Ford. They're the best cooks and best drink mixers, and they don't give a wet slap about anything else. And they always help hitchhikers aboard, partly because they like the company, but mostly because they annoys the Vogons. Which is exactly the sort of thing you need to know if you're an impoverished hitchhiker trying to see the marvels of the universe for less than 30 Altarian dollars a day, and that's my job. Fun, isn't it? Arthur looked lost. It's amazing, he said, and frowned one of the other mattresses. Unfortunately, I got stuck on there for rather longer than I intended, said Ford. I came for a week and got stuck for 15 years. How'd you get there in the first place? Easy. I got left with a teaser. A teaser? Yeah. What is a teaser? Teasers are usually rich kids with nothing to do. They cruise around looking for plants that haven't made interstellar contact yet and buzz them. Buzz them? Arthur began to feel that Ford was enjoying making life difficult for him. Yeah, said Ford, they buzz them. They find some isolated spot with very few around and land right by some poor unsuspecting soul whom no one's ever going to believe and then strut up and down in front of him wearing silly antennas on the head and making beep-beep noises. Rather childish, really. Ford leaned back on the mattress with his hands behind his head and looked infuriatingly pleased with himself. Ford, insisted Arthur, I don't know if this sounds like a silly question, but what am I doing here? Well, you know that, said Ford, I rescued from the Earth. What's happened to the Earth? Ah, it's been demolished. Has it? Said Arthur heavily. Yes, it just burrowed away into space. Well, said Arthur, I'm a bit upset about that. Ford frowned to himself and seemed to roll the thought round his mind. Yes, I can understand that, he said at last. Understand that? Shouted Understand. Understand that? Ford sprang up. Keep looking at the book, he hissed urgently. What? Don't panic. I'm not panicking. Yes, you are. Alright, so I'm panicking. What else is there to do? You just come along with me and have a good time. The galaxy's a fun place. You need to have this fish in your ear. I beg your pardon, asked Arthur. Rather politely, he thought. Ford was holding up a small glass jar, which quite clearly had a small yellow fish wriggling around it. Arthur blinked at him. He wished there was something simple and recognizable he could grasp hold of. He would have felt safe if alongside the Dentresses' underwear, the piles of scorn-shellless mattresses, and the man from Beetlejuice holding up a small yellow fish, and offering to put in his ear had he been able to see just a small packet of cornflakes. But he couldn't, and he didn't feel safe. Take a sip. Suddenly, a violent noise leaped at them from no source that he could identify. He gasped in terror. It would sound like a man trying to gargle while fighting a pack of wolves. Said Ford, listen. It might be important. Important? It's the Vogon captain making an announcement on the tannoy. You mean that's how the Vogons talk? Listen. But I can't speak Vogon. You don't need to. Just put this fish in your ear. Ford, with a lightning movement, clapped his hand to Arthur's ear, and he had the sudden sickening sensation of the fish slithering deep into his aura tract. Gasping with horror, he scrambled at his ear for a second or so, but then slowly turned goggle-eyed with wonder. He's experiencing the oral equivalent of looking at a picture of two black silhouetted faces and suddenly seeing it as a picture of a white candlestick. Or of looking at a lot of colored dots on a piece of paper which suddenly resolve themselves into the figure 6 and mean that your optician is going to charge you a lot of money for a new pair of glasses. He was still listening to the Howell Gurgles. He knew that, only now it had somehow taken on the semblance of perfectly straightforward English. This is what he heard. Howl, howl, gurgle, bow, gurgle, bow, howl, howl, gurgle, howl, gurgle, should have a good time. Message repeats, this is your captain speaking, so stop whatever you're doing and pay attention. First of all, I see from our instruments that we have a couple of hitchhikers aboard. Hello, wherever you are. I just want to make it totally clear that you are not at all welcome. I worked hard to get where I am today, and I didn't become captain of a Vogon constructed ship simply so I could turn into a taxi service for a load of degenerate freeloaders. I have sent out a search party, and as soon as they find you, I will put you off the ship. If you're very lucky, I might read you some of my poetry first. Secondly, we were about to jump into hyperspace for the journey to Barnard Star. On arrival, we will stay in dock for a 72-hour refit, and no one is to leave the ship during that time. I repeat, all planet leave is cancelled. I've just had an unhappy love affair, so I don't see why anybody else should have a good time. Message ends. Oh, I stopped. Arthur discovered to his embarrassment that he was lying curled up in a small ball on the floor with his arms wrapped around his head. He smiled weakly. "Charming man," he said. "I wish I had a daughter so I could forbid her to marry one." "You wouldn't need to," said Ford. "They got as much sex appeal as a road accident." "No, don't move," he added as Arthur began to uncurl himself. "You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk." "What's so unpleasant about being drunk?" "You ask a glass of water." Arthur thought about this. "Ford," he said. "Yeah? What's this fish doing in my ear?" "It's translating for you. It's a babblefish. Look it up in the book if you like." He tossed over the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and then curled himself up into a fetal ball to prepare himself for the jump. At that moment, the bottom fell out of Arthur's mind. His eyes turned inside out, his feet began to leak out of the top of his head, the room folded flat around him, spun around, shifted out of existence, and left him sliding into his own navel. They're passing through hyperspace. The babblefish, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quietly, is small, yellow, and leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on brainwave energy received not from its own carrier, but from those around it. It absorbs all unconscious mental frequencies from this brainwave energy to nourish itself with. It then excretes into the mind of its carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thought frequencies with nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain, which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all this is that if you stick a babblefish in your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix, which has been fed into your mind by your babblefish. Now, it's such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this. I refuse to prove that I exist as God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. Says man. The babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance, it proves you exist, and so, therefore, by your own arguments, you don't QED. Oh dear, says God, I hadn't thought of that, and promptly vanishes in a puff of logic. Oh, that was easy, says man. And for an encore, goes on to prove that the black is white and gets self-killed on the next zebra crossing. Most leading theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingo's kidneys, but that didn't stop Ulon Kofu from making a small fortune when he used it as the central theme of his best-selling book. Well, that about wraps it up for God. Meanwhile, the poor babblefish, by effectively removing all barriers to communication between different races and cultures, has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation. Arthur let out a low groan. He was horrified to discover that the kick through hyperspace... He was horrified to discover that the kick through hyperspace had killed him. He was now 6 light years from the place that the Earth would have been if it still existed. The Earth. Visions of it swam sickeningly through his nauseated mind. There was no way his imagination could feel the impact of the whole Earth having gone. It was too big. He brought his feelings by thinking that his parents and his sister had gone. No reaction. He thought of all the people he had been close to. No reaction. Then he thought of a complete stranger he had been staying behind in the queue at the supermarket 2 days before and felt a sudden stab. The supermarket was gone. Everyone in it was gone. Nelson's Coleman had gone. Nelson's column has gone. There would be no outcry because there was no one left to make an outcry. From now on, Nelson's column only existed in his mind. England only existed in his mind. His mind stuck here in this dank, smelly, steel-lined spaceship. A wave of claustrophobia closed in on him. England no longer existed. He'd got that somehow. He got it. He tried again. America, he thought, was gone. He couldn't grasp it. He decided to smell it again. New York has gone. No reaction. He'd never seriously believed it existed anyway. The dollar, he thought, has sunk forever. Slight tremor there. Every Bogart movie has been wiped, he said to himself, and that gave him a nasty knock. McDonald's, he thought. There's no longer any such thing as McDonald's hamburger. He passed out. When he came around a second later, he found he was sobbing for his mother. He jerked himself violently to his feet. Ford! Ford looked up from where he was sitting in the corner, humming to himself. He always found the actual travel through space part of space travel rather trying. Yeah? He said. If you're a researcher on this book thing and you were on Earth, you must have been gathering material on it. Well, I was able to extend the original entry a bit, yes? Let me see what it says in this edition, then. I've got to see it. Yeah, okay. He passed it over again. Arthur grabbed hold of it and tried to stop his hand shaking. He pressed the entry for the relevant page. The screen flashed and swirled, dissolved into page print. Arthur stared at it. It doesn't have an entry! He burst out. Ford looked over his shoulder. This does. Down there, see at the bottom of the screen, just above eccentric kilometers, the triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6? Arthur followed Ford's finger and saw it was pointing. For a moment, it still didn't register. Then his mind nearly blew up. What? Harmless? Hell, I was going to say, harmless? One word? Ford shrugged. Well, there are 100 billion stars in the galaxy, only a limited amount of space in the book's microprocessors, he said. And no one knew much about the Earth, of course. Well, for God's sake, I hope you managed to rectify that a bit. Oh, yes. Well, I managed to transmit a new entry off to the editor. He had to trim it a bit, but it's still an improvement. Does it say now? Asked Arthur. Mostly harmless, admitted Ford with a slightly embarrassed cough. Mostly harmless, shouted Arthur. What's that noise? Hissed Ford. It was me shouting, shouted Arthur. No, shut up, said Ford. I think we're in trouble. You think we're in trouble? Outside the door were clear sounds of marching footsteps. The dress? Whispered Arthur. No, those are steel-tipped boots, said Ford. There was a sharp, ringing tap on the door. Then who is it? Said Arthur. Well, said Ford, if we're lucky, it's just the Vogons come to throw us into space. And if we're unlucky, said Ford grimly, the captain might be serious in his threat that he's going to read us some of his poetry first. Sorry, I had to take a sip, yeah. I had to get that liquid in me. Parch my throat, yeah. Okay. Chapter 7. Vogan poetry is, of course, the third worst in the universe. The second worst is that of the Asgoths of Kriya during a recitation by the poet Master Grunthos, the fragment of his poem, Ode to a small lump of green putty I found in my armpit one midsummer morning. 4 of his audience died of internal hemorrhaging, and the president of the Mid-Galactic Arts Nobbling Council survived by gnawing one of his own legs off. Grunthos is reported to have been disappointed by the poem's reception, and was about to embark on a reading of his 12-book epic entitled My Favorite Bath Time Gurgles when his own major intestine, in a desperate attempt to save life and civilization, leaped straight up through his neck and throttled his brain. The very worst poetry of all perished along its creator, Paula Nancy Millstone Jennings of Greensbridge, Essex, England, in the destruction of the planet Earth. Prostetnik Vogan Jeltz smiled very slowly. This was done not so much for effect as because he was trying to remember the sequence of muscle movements. He had a terribly therapeutic yell at his prisoners and was now feeling quite relaxed and ready for a little callousness. The prisoners sat in poetry appreciating chairs, strapped in. Vogan suffered no illusions as to the regard their works were generally held in. The early attempts at composition had been part of a bludgeoning insistence that they be accepted as properly evolved and coded race. But now the only thing that kept them going was sheer bloody mindlessness. It's mindlessness. The sweat stood out cold on Ford Prefect's brow and slid round to the electrodes strapped to his temples. These were attached to a battery of electronic equipment, imagery intensifiers, rhythmic modulators, alliterative residulators, and simile dumpers, all designed to heighten the experience of the poem and make sure that not a single nuance of the poet's thought was lost. Arthur Dent sat and quivered. He had no idea what he was in for, but he knew that he hadn't liked anything that happened so far and didn't think things were likely to change. Vogan began to read a fetid little passage of his own devising. Oh, Fredel Boogerly, he began. Spasms wrecked Ford's body. This was worse than he'd been prepared for. Thy micturations are to me as pluttered garbalachus on a large bee. Went Ford Prefect, wrenching his head back as lumps of pain thumped through it. He could dimly see beside him Arthur lolling and rolling in his seat. He clenched his teeth. Group, I implore thee, continued the merciless Vogan. My fumbling, tugging drums. His voice was rising to a horrible pitch of impassioned studency. Impetuously strangle me with crinkly brittle bottles, or rend thee in the gobblets with my blogocrinchian. See if I don't. Cried Ford Prefect, and through one final spasm as the electronic enhancement of the last line caught him full blast across the temples, he went limp. Arthur lolled. Now, Earthlings, roared the Vogan. He didn't know that Ford Prefect was in fact from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Beetlejuice, and wouldn't have cared if he had. I present you with a simple choice. Either die in the vacuum of space, or, he paused for melodramatic effect, tell me how good you thought my poem was. He threw himself backward into a huge, leathery, bat-shaped seat and watched them. He did the smile again. Ford was rasping for breath. He rolled his dusty tongue round his parched mouth and moaned. Arthur said brightly, "Actually, I quite liked it." Ford turned and gaped. Here was an approach that quite simply not occurred to him. The Vogan raised a surprised eyebrow that effectively obscured his nose and was therefore no bad thing. "Oh, good," he roared in considerable astonishment. "Oh, yes," said Arthur. "I thought some of the metaphysical in imagery was really particularly effective." Ford continued to stare at him, slowly organizing his thoughts around this totally new concept. Were they really going to be able to bareface their way out of this? "Yes, do continue," invited the Vogan. "Oh, and, interesting rhythmic devices, too," continued Arthur, which seemed to contemplate the, he floundered. Ford leaped to his rescue, hazarding, "Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor of the, he floundered too, but Arthur was ready again. Humanity of the Veganity, Ford hissed at him. Ah, yes, Veganity, sorry, of the poet's compassionate soul. Arthur felt like he was on a home stretch now, which contrives through the medium of the verse structure to sublimate this, transcend that, and come to terms with the fundamental dichotomies of the other. He's reaching a triumphant crescendo, and one is the profound and vivid insight which suddenly gave out on him. Ford leaped in with the coup de grace into whatever it was the poem was about. He yelled at the corner of his mouth, "Well done, Earth, that was very good." The Vogon perused them. For a moment his embittered racial soul had been touched, but he thought, no, too little, too late. His voice took on the quality of a cat's snagging brushed on. "So what you're saying is I write poetry because underneath my mean, callous, heartless exterior I really just want to be loved," he said. He paused. "Is that right?" Ford laughed a nervous laugh. "Well, I mean, yes," he said. "Don't we all, deep down, The Vogan stood up. "No, well, you're completely wrong," he said. "I just write poetry to throw my mean, callous, heartless exterior into sharp relief. I'm going to throw you off the ship anyway. Guard, take the prisoners to number 3 airlock and throw them out." "What?" shouted Ford. A huge, young Vogon guard stepped forward and yanked them out of their straps with his huge, blubbery arms. "You can't throw us into space," yelled Ford. "We're trying to write a book." "Resistance is useless," shouted the Vogan guard back at him. It was the first phrase he learned when he joined the Vogon Guard Corps. The captain watched with detached amusement and then turned away. Arthur stared around him wildly. "Look, I want to die now," he yelled. "I still got a headache. I don't want to go to heaven with a headache. I'd be all cross and wouldn't enjoy it." "No, I'm good." The guard grasped them both firmly around the neck and, bowing deferentially toward his captain's back, hoiked them both, protesting out of the bridge. A steel door closed and the captain was on his own again. He hummed quietly and mused to himself, lightly fingering his notebook of verses. He said. "Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor." He considered this for a moment, then closed the book with a grim smile. "Death's too good for them," he said. The long, steel-lined corridor echoed to the feeble struggles of the two humanoids clasped firmly under rubbery Vogan armpits. "This is great," sputtered Arthur. "This is really terrific. Let go of me, you brute." The Vogan guard dragged them on. "Don't you worry," said Ford. "I'll think of something." He didn't sound hopeful. Second reading here. Okay, that's what it was. I got a message or something I thought was something really important, but it's just a go live notification for the server I'm on. That's all. Okay, sorry about that. Back to reading. "Resistance is useless," bellowed the guard. "Don't just say things like that," stammered Ford. How can anyone maintain a positive mental attitude for saying things like that?" "My God," complained Arthur. "You're talking about a positive mental attitude and you haven't even had your plant demolished today. I woke up this morning, thought I'd have a nice relaxed day, do a bit of reading, brush the dog. It's now just after 4 in the afternoon, and I'm already being thrown out of an alien spaceship 6 light years from the smoking remains of the Earth." He spluttered and gurgled as the Vogan tightened his grip. "All right," said Ford, "just stop panicking." "Who said anything about panicking?" snapped Arthur. "It's still just the coach circ. You wait till I sit down to sleep and found my bearings, then I'll start panicking." "Arthur, you're being hysterical. Shut up!" Ford tried desperately to think, but was interrupted by the guard shouting again. "Resistance is useless." "And you can shut up as well," snapped Ford. "Resistance is useless." "Oh, give it a rest," said Ford. He twisted his head till he was looking straight up into his captain's face. A thought struck him. Do you really enjoy this sort of thing? He asked suddenly. The Vogan stopped dead, and a look of immense stupidity seeped slowly over his face. Enjoy, he boomed. What do you mean? What I mean, said Ford, is this to give you a full, satisfying life, stomping around, shouting, pushing people out of spaceships. The Vogan stared up at the low steel ceiling, and his eyebrows almost rolled over each other. His mouth slacked. Finally he said, Well, the hours are good. They'd have to be, agreed Ford. Arthur twisted his head around to look at Ford. Ford, what are you doing? He asked in an amazed whisper. Oh, just trying to take an interest in the world around me. Okay, he said. So the hours are pretty good then? You resumed. The Vogan stared down at him as sluggish thoughts mulled around in the murky depths. Yeah, he said. Now you come to mention it, most of the actual minutes are pretty lousy, except, he thought again, which prior to looking at the ceiling, except some of the shouting I quite like. He filled his lungs, bellowed. Resistance is... Sure, yes, interrupted Ford hurriedly. You're good at that, I can tell. But if it's mostly lousy, he said, slowly giving the words time to reach their mark, then why do you do it? What is it? The girls? The leather? The macho? Well, would you just find that coming to terms with the mindless tedium of it all presents an interesting challenge? Arthur looked backward and forward between them in bafflement. Said the guard. I don't know. I think just sort of do it, really. Mount said the spaceship guard was a good fear for a young Vogan, the uniform, the low stun ray holster, the mindless tedium. There you are, Arthur, said Ford to the air, someone reaching the conclusion of his argument. You think you've got problems. Arthur rather thought he had, apart from the unpleasant business with his home planet. The Vogan guard had half throttled him already, and he didn't like the sound of being thrown into space very much. Try to understand his problem, insisted Ford. Here he is, poor lad. His entire life's work is stamping around, throwing people off spaceships, and shouting at the guard. And shouting, sure, said Ford, patting the blubbery arm clamped round his neck in friendly concession. He doesn't even know why he's doing it. Arthur agreed this was very sad. He did this with a small, feeble gesture because he was too asphyxiated to speak. Deep rumblings of amusement came from the guard. Well, now you put it like that, I suppose. Good lad, encouraged Ford. But all right, went the rumblings. So what's the alternative? Well, said Ford brightly but surely, stop doing it, of course. Tell them, he went on, you're not going to do it anymore. He felt he ought to add something to that, but for the moment the guard seemed to have his mind occupied pondering that much. Said the guard. Well, that doesn't sound that great to me. Ford suddenly felt the moment slipping away. No, wait a minute, he said. That's just the start, you see. There's more to it than that, you see. But that moment, the guard renewed his grip and continued his original purpose of lugging his prisoners to the airlock. He was obviously quite touched. No, I think if it's all the same to you, he said, I'd better get you both shoved into this airlock and then go get on with some other bits of shouting I've got to do. It wasn't all the same for Ford Prefect at all. Come on now, but look, he said less slowly, less brightly. Said Arthur without any clear inflection. Now hang on, pursued Ford. There's music and art and things to tell you about yet. Arrgh! Resistance is useless, bellowed the guard in the ad. You see, if I keep it up, I can eventually get promoted to senior shouting officer, and there aren't usually many vacancies for non-shouting and non-pushing people about officers, so I think I'd better stick to what I know. They had now reached the airlock, a large circular steel hatchway of massive strength and weight let into the inner skin of the craft. The guard operated control, and the hatchway swung smoothly open. Thanks for taking an interest, said the Vogan guard. Bye now. He flung Ford and Arthur through the hatchway into a small chamber within. Arthur lay panting for breath. Ford scrambled around and flung his shoulder uselessly against the reclosing hatchway. But listen, he shouted to the guard. There's a whole world you don't know anything about. Here, how about this? Desperately, he grabbed for the only bit of culture he knew offhand. He hummed the first bar of Beethoven's Fifth. Da-da-dum-dum. Doesn't that stir anything in you? No, said the guard. Not really. But mention it to my aunt. He said anything further after that, it was lost. The hatchway shielded itself tight, and all sound was lost except the faint, distant hum of the ship's engines. They were in a brightly polished cylindrical chamber about 6 feet in diameter and 10 feet long. Ford looked round it, panting. Potentially bright lad, I thought, he said, and slumped against the curved wall. Arthur was still laying in the curve of the floor where he had fallen. He didn't look up. He just lay panting. We're trapped now, aren't we? Yes, said Ford. We're trapped. Well, didn't you think of anything? Thought you said you were going to think of something. Perhaps you thought of something I didn't notice. Oh, yes, I thought of something, panted Ford. Arthur looked up expectantly. But unfortunately, continued Ford, it rather involved being on the other side of this airtight hatchway. He kicked the hatch they'd just been thrown through. But it was a good idea, was it? Oh, yes, very neat. What was it? Well, I hadn't worked out the details yet. Not much point now, is there? So, what happens next, Arthur? Oh, well, the hatchway in front of us will open automatically. In a few moments, we will shoot out into deep space, I expect, and asphyxiate. If you take a lungful of air with you, you can last for up to 30 seconds, of course, said Ford. He stuck his hands behind his back, raised his eyebrows, and started to hum an old Beetlejuicean battle hymn. To Arthur's eyes, he suddenly looked very alien. This is it, said Arthur. We are going to die. Yes, said Ford, except, no, wait a minute. He suddenly lunged across the chamber at something behind Arthur's line of vision. What's the switch? He cried. What? Where? Cried Arthur, twisting around. No, I was only fooling, said Ford. We're going to die after all. He slumped against the wall again and carried on the tune from where he left off. You know, said Arthur, it's times like this where I'm trapped in an airlock with a man from Beetlejuice and about to die of asphyxiation in deep space that I really wish I listened to what my mother told me when I was young. Why? What did she tell you? I don't know. I didn't listen. Oh, Ford carried on humming. This is terrific, Arthur thought to himself. Nelson's column has gone, McDonald's has gone, all except is me in the words mostly harmless. Any second now, all that will be left is mostly harmless. And yesterday, the planet seemed to be going so well. A motor whirred, a slight hiss built into a deafening roar of rushing air as the outer hatchway opened onto an empty blackness studded with tiny, impossibly bright points of light. Ford and Arthur popped into outer space like corks from a toy gun. We've reached chapter 8, my shades. It only took forever. One sec. I hope you're all doing well. And you're having a good night so far. I apologize, like some of my model's been kind of wonky. I'm doing my big yawn. Back to the book. I might stop at the 2 hour mark because my throat is starting to get dry. It's like die. It's dead guy. I don't know, but I kinda wanna keep going. I will figure it out. Yeah, eventually. Who knows? Yeah, I'll probably stop at around the 2 hour mark. This is a lot of yapping for the Neko. Chapter 8. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a wholly remarkable book. It has been Okay. It has been compiled and recompiled many times over many years and in many different words. Under many different editorships, it contains contributions from countless numbers of travelers and researchers. The introduction begins like this. Space, it says, is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just PS space. Listen, and so on. After a while, the style settles down a bit and begins to tell you things you really need to know, like the fact that the fabulously beautiful planet Beth Selman is now so worried about the cumulative erosion by 10 billion visiting tourists a year that any net imbalance between the amount you eat and the amount you excrete while on the planet is surgically removed from your body weight when you leave, so every time you go to the laboratory, it is vitally important to get a receipt. To be fair, though, when confronted by the sheer enormity of the distances between the stars, better minds than the one responsible for the guide's introduction have faltered. Some invite you to consider for a moment a peanut in reading a small one in Johannesburg. Another such dizzying concept. The simple truth is that the interstellar distances will not fit into the human imagination. Even light, which travels so fast that it takes most of us thousands of years to realize that it travels at all, takes time to journey between the stars. It takes 8 minutes to journey from the star source to the place where Earth used to be, and 4 years more to arrive at the soul's nearest stellar neighbor, Alpha Proxima. For light to reach the other side of the galaxy, for it to reach Damogran, for instance, it takes rather longer, 500,000 years. The record for hitchhiking this distance is just under 5 years, but you don't get to see much on the way. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says that if you hold a lungful of air, you can survive in the total vacuum of space for about 30 seconds. However, it does go on to say that with space being the mind-bogglingly size it is, the chances of being plucked up by another ship within those 30 seconds are 2 to the power of 276,709 to 1 against. By a totally staggering coincidence, that is also the telephone number of a Islington flat where Arthur once went to a very good party and met a very nice girl whom totally failed to get off with. She went off with a gatecrasher to the planet Earth, the Islington planet of the Islington flat and the telephone have all now been demolished. It is comforting to reflect that they are all in some small way commemorated by the fact that 29 seconds later, Ford and Arthur were rescued. Chapter 9. A computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because the reason was in fact out to lunch. A hole had just appeared in the galaxy. It was exactly a nothingness of a second long, a nothingness of an inch wide, and quite a lot of millions of light years from end to end. As it closed up, lots of paper hats and party balloons fell out of it and drifted off through the universe. A team of 7 3-foot-high market analysts fell out of it and died, partly of asphyxiation, partly of surprise. 239,000 lightly fried eggs fell out of it too, materializing in a large, wobbly heap on the famine-struck land of Pogrel in the Panzel system. The whole Pogthro tribe has died out from famine except for one last man who died of cholesterol poisoning some weeks later. The nothingness of a second for which the whole existed reverberated backward and forward through time in a most improbable fashion. Somewhere in the deeply remote past, it seriously traumatized a small random group of atoms drifting through the empty sterility of space and make them cling together in a most extraordinarily unlikely patterns. These patterns quickly learned to copy themselves. This was part of what was so extraordinary about the patterns. It went on to cause massive trouble in every planet they drifted onto. That was how life began in the universe. 5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up the pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent, gulping like half-spent fish. There you are, gasped Ford, scrabbling for a fingerhold on the pavement as it raced to the third reach of the unknown. I told you I think it's something. Oh, sure, said Arthur. Sure. Bright idea of mine, said Ford. To find a spaceship and get rescued by it. The real universe arched secretly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with goblets of jello. Time blossomed, matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. Come on, said Arthur. The chances against it were astronomical. Don't knock it. It works, said Ford. What sort of ship are we in? Asked Arthur, as the pit of eternity yawned beneath them. I don't know, said Ford. I haven't opened my eyes yet. No, nor have I, said Arthur. The universe jumped, froze, quivered, and split out in several unexpected directions. Arthur and Ford opened their eyes and looked about in considerable surprise. Good God, said Arthur. It looks just like the seafront at South End. Hell, I'm relieved to hear you say that, said Ford. Why? Because I thought I must be going mad. Perhaps you are. Perhaps you only thought I said it. Ford thought about this. Well, did you say it or didn't? Or didn't you? He asked. I think so, said Arthur. Well, perhaps we're both going mad. Yes, said Arthur. We'd be mad, all things considered, to think this was South End. Well, do you think this is South End? Oh, yes, so do I. Therefore, we must be mad. Let's stay for it. Yes, said a passing maniac. Who was that? Asked Arthur. Who, the man with the 5 heads and the elderberry bush full of kippers? Yes. I don't know. Just someone. Ah! They sat on the pavement and watched with sudden unease as huge children bounced heavily along the sand and wild horses thundered through the sky, taking fresh supplies of reinforced railings to uncertain areas. You know, said Arthur with a slight cough, if this is South End, there's something very odd about it. You mean the way the sea stays steady as a rock and the buildings keep washing up and down? Said Ford. Yes, I thought that was odd too. In fact, he continued, as with a huge bang, South End split itself into 6 equal segments which danced and spun giddily around each other in lewd and ostentatious formations. There was something altogether very strange going on. Wild yelling noises of pipes and strings seared through the wind. Hot donuts popped out the road for 10 pence each. Swordfish stormed out of the sky, and Arthur and Ford decided to make a run for it. They plunged through heavy walls of sound, mountains of archaic thoughts, valleys of mood music, bad shoe sessions, and footling bats, and suddenly heard a girl's voice. It sounded quite a sensible voice, but it just said, to the power of 100,000 to 1 against and falling. And that was all. Ford skidded down a beam of light and spun around trying to find a source for the voice, but could see nothing he could seriously believe in. What was that voice? Shouted Arthur. I don't know, yelled Ford. I don't know. It sounded like a measurement of probability. Probability? What do you mean? Probability. You know, like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 4 against. It said 2 to the power of 100,000 and 2 1 against. That's pretty improbable, you know. A 1,000,000-gallon vat of custard upended itself over them without warning. But what does it mean, cried Arthur. What, the custard? No, the measurement of improbability! I don't know at all. I think we're on some kind of spaceship. I can only assume, said Arthur, that this is not the first-class compartment. Bugles appeared in the fabric of space-time. Great, ugly... Oh, bulges, bulges. Bulges appeared in the fabric of space-time. Great, ugly bulges. Arrgh, said Arthur as he felt his body softening and bending in unusual directions. That fence seems to be melting away, the stars are swirling, a dust ball, my legs drifting off into the sunset, my left arm come off too. A frightening thought struck him. Hell, he said, how am I going to operate my digital watch now? He wound his eyes desperately around in Ford's direction. Ford, he said, you're turning into a penguin. Stop it. Again came the voice. 2 to the power of 75,000 to 1 against and falling. Ford whirled around his pawn in a furious circle. Hey, who are you? He quacked. Where are you? What's going on? Is anyone stopping it? Please relax, said the voice pleasantly. Like a stewardess in the airliner with only one wing and 2 engines, one of which was on fire. You are perfectly safe. But that's not the point, raged Ford. The point is I am now a perfectly safe penguin. My colleague here is rapidly running out of limbs. It's all right. I got them back now, said Arthur. 2 to the power of 50,000 to 1 and falling, said the voice. Admittedly, said Arthur, they're longer than I usually like them, but... Isn't there anything, squawked Ford, in avian fury, you feel you ought to be telling us? The voice cleared its throat. A giant petite four lopped into the distance. Welcome, the voice said, to the starship Heart of Gold. The voice continued. Please do not be alarmed, it said. By anything you see or hear around you, you are bound to feel some initial ill effects as you have been rescued from certain death at an improbability level of 2 to the power of 276,000 to 1 against possibly much higher. We are now cruising at a level of 2 to the power of 725,000 to 1 against and falling. We will be restoring normality just as soon as we are sure what is normal anyway. Thank you, 2 to the power of 20,000 to 1 against and falling. The voice cut out. Ford and Arthur were in a small, luminous pink cubicle. Ford was wildly excited. Arthur, he said, this is fantastic. We've been picked up by a ship powered by the infinite improbability drive. This is incredible. I heard rumors about it before. They were all officially denied, but they must have done it. They built the improbability drive. Arthur, this is... Arthur? What's happening? Arthur has jammed himself against the door to the cubicle, trying to hold it closed, but it was ill-fitting. Tiny, furry little hands were squeezing themselves through the cracks. Their fingers were ink-stained. Tiny voices shouted insanely. Arthur looked up. Ford, he said, there's an infinite number of monkeys outside who want to talk to us about the script for Hamlet they've worked out. Yes, Morgan. Math. Evil, evil math, yeah. Chapter 10. The infinite improbability drive is a wonderful new method of crossing vast interstellar distances in a mere nothingness of a second without all that tedious mucking about in hyperspace. It was discovered by a lucky chance and then developed into a governable form of propulsion by the Galactic Government's research team on Demogran. This briefly is the story of its discovery. The principle of generating small amounts of finite improbability by simply hooking the logic circuits of a Babelini 57 submesom brain to atomic vector plotter suspended in a strong Brownian motion producer, say a nice hot cup of tea, were of course well understood, and such generators were often used to break the ice at parties by making all the molecules in the hostess's undergarments leap simultaneously 1 foot to the left in accordance with the theory of interdependency. Many respectable physicists said that they weren't going to stand for this, partly because it was the basement of science, but mostly because they didn't get invited to those sorts of parties. Another thing they couldn't stand was the perpetual failure they encountered in trying to construct a machine which could generate the infinite improbability field needed to flip a spaceship across the mind-paralyzing distances between the furthest stars, and in the end they grumpily announced that such a machine was virtually impossible. Then, one day, a student who had been left to sweep up the lab after a particularly unsuccessful party found himself reasoning this way. If, he thought to himself, such a machine is a virtual impossibility, then it must logically be a finite improbability, so all I have to do in order to make one is to work out exactly how improbable it is, feed that figure into a finite improbability generator, give it a fresh cup of really hot tea, and turn it on. He did this and was rather startled to discover that he had managed to create the long-sought-after golden and infinite improbability generator out of thin air. It startled him even more when just after he was awarded the Galactic Institute's prize for extreme cleverness, he got lynched by a rampaging mob of respectable physicists who had finally realized that one thing they really couldn't stand was a smartass. Alright, I'm going to stop there because my voice is tired. We've just reached chapter 11. Where I'm going to find something to use here. I'll use this as a bookmark. Ah, that was a lot of talking. I hope you all had a fun time with me. I apologize if it was boring at certain parts. I did try to be entertaining. It's the first time I've ever done this with people. To be honest, we didn't really get far in the book. Like, I can read much faster than that, but I didn't want to, speed around and everything. I wanted us to go through this. I'm out of breath. Anyway, yeah, thank you all so much for coming by. Hope we all had a wonderful time. We'll definitely be doing more of this and possibly other books as well. Like I said, I'm taking I got my VTuber stream. My VTuber stream broke. Okay, there we go. Fixed it. So we'll be doing more of this in the future. Also, along with other things, like I said, I am getting burnt out from games, so we're going to be taking a break from that. But yeah, we're doing more books in the future after I get done with this one. I will have to look into getting a camera for in-camera streams to possibly do building a Gundam model with you guys. But yeah, stuff like that. Excuse me. But until then, I will see you all tomorrow, I think. I might be doing an earlier stream. Who knows? I will figure it out. But I hope you all had a good rest of your day, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time zone it is for you. And I will see you all tomorrow. We'll go find someone to raid. So let me go ahead and go here to my channel. My damn channel. Let's see, who are we gonna raid? I got lots of people gonna raid here. We are going to go ahead and raid. Boy, this is hard for me. Why is this hard for me? Yeah. I had someone in mind, and then my brain stopped. Okay, we'll go raid Nohaka Veda, an Eldritch deity. So raid. Ooh, no, not hit slash, not that. Raid. I hope Veda. I don't know if I'm. Let me just make sure I'm spelling it. Oh, Veda. Yep. Alright, and here is the raid message, which you can do if you are a follower of the channel. Yeah, that. Like I said, I hope you all had a wonderful time hanging out with me. Now I'll see you all next time. Until then, hope you all have a good rest of your night. Bye-bye, everyone. I love you.